The blood had soaked through her dress and painted a crimson trail across the Rocky Mountain pass. But Molly Ashford kept stumbling forward because stopping meant dying alone in the wilderness. She had been riding for 3 days straight, fleeing from the men who had killed her father and brother during a land dispute back in Arkansas, when her horse had spooked at a rattlesnake and thrown her against the jagged rocks. The fall had torn open her side, and now every step sent lightning bolts of agony through her body as she clutched the wound, her vision blurring with each labored breath. The November wind of 1883 cut through her thin traveling clothes, and she knew she would not make it much farther, but she refused to surrender to the mountain that loomed around her like a stone prison. Yates Kincaid had been tracking an injured elk through the Colorado Rockies for the better part of the afternoon, when he spotted something that made him pull his horse to an immediate halt. At first he thought it might be the elk's blood marking the stones, but the trail was wrong, too erratic, and when he dismounted to examine it closer, his stomach dropped. Human blood. Fresh. He was a weathered man of 26 years, hardened by a life spent moving cattle and surviving harsh winters, but the sight of that desperate trail made his heart clench with an urgency he had not felt in years. Without hesitation, he swung back into his saddle and urged his horse forward, following the crimson path up the treacherous pass. When he found her, she was on her knees, swaying like a willow in a storm. One hand pressed against her side while the other scraped uselessly at the ground as if she might pull herself forward through sheer will. Her dark hair had fallen loose from its pins and hung in tangled waves around her pale face, and her dress was torn and stained beyond recognition. She did not seem to hear him approach, lost in the fog of pain and blood loss, and when he dismounted and rushed to her side, she flinched away with a gasp of terror. "Easy now," Yates said, his voice low and steady despite the alarm coursing through him. "I am not going to hurt you. Let me help." Molly's green eyes struggled to focus on him, seeing only a tall figure backlit by the setting sun. She tried to speak, but her words came out as nothing more than a whisper. "Please, they are coming." "Who is coming?" Yates asked, but she had already begun to collapse. He caught her before she hit the ground, and the moment his hands touched her, he felt the fever burning through her skin. The wound in her side was deep and angry, and he knew immediately that she would not survive the night without proper care. The nearest town was Silverton, more than 15 miles away through dangerous mountain terrain, and night was falling fast. He had no choice but to make the journey. He tore strips from his own shirt to bind her wound as tightly as he could, working with practiced efficiency even as his mind raced. She was barely conscious, her head lolling against his chest as he lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, and the realization of how fragile she felt made something protective and fierce awaken in his chest. He had spent most of his adult life alone, preferring the company of horses and open sky to the complications of people. But holding this dying woman in his arms, he knew he would carry her to the ends of the earth if that was what it took to save her. Getting her onto his horse was a challenge, but Yates managed to settle her in front of him, keeping one arm locked around her waist to hold her upright while the other guided the reins. Her head fell back against his shoulder, and he could feel the rapid, shallow rise and fall of her breathing. "Stay with me," he murmured, though he did not know if she could hear him. "Just stay with me a little longer." The journey down the mountain was a nightmare of switchbacks and loose stones, made infinitely worse by the gathering darkness. Yates kept his horse at the fastest pace he dared, every instinct screaming at him to hurry while his experience warned him that one wrong step could send them all tumbling down the mountainside. Molly drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes making small sounds of pain, other times going so still and quiet that he had to press his fingers against her throat to reassure himself that her heart still beat. "What is your name?" he asked during one of her more lucid moments, desperate to keep her talking, to keep her anchored to the world. "Molly," she breathed, the word barely audible over the wind. "Molly Ashford, Molly," he repeated, and the name felt right on his tongue. "I am Yates Kincaid." "You are going to be all right, Molly. I promise you that." She made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "You should not make promises you cannot keep." "I do not make promises I cannot keep," he said firmly, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. The miles crawled by with agonizing slowness. Yates's arms ached from holding Molly steady, and his horse was beginning to tire, but he pushed on relentlessly, speaking to her whenever she seemed to be slipping away, telling her about the ranch he hoped to buy someday, about the cattle he had driven from Texas to Montana, about anything and everything that might keep her tethered to life. Sometimes she responded with a word or two. Other times she just shuddered against him, but as long as she was breathing, he refused to give up. It was nearly midnight when the lights of Silverton finally appeared in the distance, golden squares of warmth in the cold darkness. Yates felt a surge of relief so intense it nearly unmanned him, but he kept his focus, guiding his exhausted horse through the quiet streets to the only building still showing light, the doctor's office above the general store. He dismounted with Molly still in his arms and kicked at the door with enough force to wake the dead. "Doctor! I need a doctor." The door opened to reveal a gray-haired man in his 50s, spectacles perched on his nose and irritation written across his face. But the moment he saw Molly's blood-soaked form, his expression shifted to professional concern. "Bring her in, quickly now." The next hours passed in a blur. The doctor, a man named Samuel Porter, worked with calm efficiency, cleaning and stitching Molly's wound while Yates stood nearby, unable to leave even when Porter suggested he might want to wait outside. He watched as the doctor's capable hands moved over her pale skin, watched as her face tightened with pain even in her unconscious state, and felt a kind of helpless rage at his own inability to do more. "She is lucky you found her when you did," Porter said, as he tied off the final stitch. "Another hour and she would have bled out. As it is, infection is still a risk. She will need constant care for the next few days." "I will stay," Yates said immediately. Porter glanced at him with sharp, assessing eyes. "You know this woman?" "No," Yates admitted, "but I am staying." The doctor did not argue. Perhaps he saw something in Yates's face that told him it would be useless, or perhaps he simply needed the help. He showed Yates to a small room where Molly had been moved to a narrow bed, her wound bandaged and her body covered with clean blankets. She looked impossibly small and vulnerable lying there, her face still too pale, her breathing too shallow. "Watch for fever," Porter instructed. "Keep her comfortable. I will check on her in the morning." Then he left Yates alone with her, closing the door softly behind him. Yates pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, his body finally acknowledging its exhaustion. His arms trembled from the hours of carrying her, his back ached from the tension of the ride, but he could not bring himself to leave her side. He reached out and carefully took her hand in his, marveling at how delicate it felt, how cold her fingers were despite the fever burning through her. "You made it, Molly," he said quietly. "You are safe now." Through the long night, he kept vigil, dampening cloths to cool her fever, adjusting her blankets when she shivered, and simply being there so she would not wake alone. Several times she cried out in her delirium, calling for her father, begging someone named Thomas to run, reliving whatever horror had sent her fleeing through the mountains. Each time, Yates would lean close and speak to her, his voice steady and reassuring, telling her she was safe, that no one would hurt her, that he was there. Gradually, his words seemed to reach her, and she would quiet, her fingers tightening around his as if his presence alone could anchor her to safety. Dawn broke pale and cold, sending gray light through the small window. Molly's fever had broken sometime in the early hours, and she slept more peacefully now, the desperate tension gone from her face. Yates remained in his chair, unwilling to leave even though his body screamed for rest. He studied her features in the growing light, noting the determined set of her jaw, the dark sweep of her lashes against her cheeks, the faint freckles scattered across her nose. She was beautiful, he realized, though it was not her beauty that held him there. It was something else, something he could not quite name, a recognition that his life had changed the moment he had found her bleeding on that mountain pass. Dr. Porter returned mid-morning to find Yates still keeping watch. He examined Molly thoroughly, checking her wound and taking her pulse, and finally nodded with satisfaction. "The wound is clean, no signs of infection yet. She should wake soon." "How long before she can travel?" Yates asked. "Travel?" "She will be lucky to walk across this room for at least a week, possibly 2. That wound was deep and she lost a significant amount of blood. She needs rest and good food, not more bouncing around in a saddle." Porter fixed him with a stern look. "Why, are you planning to move her somewhere?" "She said someone was coming," Yates explained. "She was terrified. I need to know what she is running from." Porter's expression darkened. "That is between you and her, but I am telling you as her doctor that moving her right now could kill her just as surely as that wound would have." Yates nodded slowly, accepting this. "Then we stay here, for as long as it takes." The doctor left again, and Yates settled back into his watch. Around noon, Molly stirred, her eyelids fluttering before finally opening. For a moment, she stared at the unfamiliar ceiling in confusion, and then her gaze found Yates sitting beside her bed. Fear flashed across her face, followed quickly by recognition. "You," she whispered, her voice rough and dry. "You carried me." "I did," Yates confirmed. He reached for the water pitcher on the nearby table and poured a glass, then carefully helped her sit up enough to drink. She winced at the movement, her hand going instinctively to her bandaged side, but she managed a few sips before falling back against the pillows. "Where am I?" "Silverton, Colorado, the doctor's office. You have been unconscious for about 12 hours. He paused, studying her face. "What happened to you, Molly? Who are you running from?" Pain flickered across her features, and for a moment he thought she might refuse to answer. But then she closed her eyes and spoke, her voice hollow with grief. "My father owned land in Arkansas near the border with Oklahoma. Good land with water rights. A man named Silas Brennan wanted it, offered to buy it, but my father refused, so Brennan hired men to take it." Her breath hitched. "They came at night. My father tried to fight. My brother Thomas tried to protect us. They killed them both." Yates felt ice settle in his stomach. "And you?" "I ran. I had been out in the barn when I heard the shots. By the time I got to the house, it was too late. One of Brennan's men saw me, chased me, but I managed to get to my horse. I have been riding for days, trying to get far enough away that they could not find me." A tear slipped down her cheek. "I thought if I could just make it to Colorado, I might be safe. But my horse threw me on the mountain pass, and I thought that was it. I thought I was going to die up there alone." "You did not die," Yates said firmly, "and you are not alone." She opened her eyes to look at him, really look at him, and he saw surprise in her expression, as if she could not quite understand why this stranger would care. "Why did you help me? You do not know me. I could be anyone. You needed help," he said simply. "That is reason enough." Something shifted in her face, a crack in the wall of fear and grief she had built around herself. "Thank you," she whispered. "I do not know how to repay you for what you have done." "You do not owe me anything," Yates said. "Just get well, that is all I ask." Over the following days, Molly slowly recovered her strength. The wound healed cleanly, much to Dr. Porter's satisfaction, and the color gradually returned to her face. Yates remained close, helping her when she needed it, giving her space when she did not, and listening when she wanted to talk about her father and brother, about the life she had lost. He learned that she was 23 years old, that she had been helping her father run their small ranch since her mother died 5 years earlier, that she loved to read, and had once dreamed of becoming a teacher. In turn, she learned about him, about his rootless life moving from ranch to ranch, about his own lost family, parents who had died of fever when he was young, leaving him to make his own way in the world. They talked for hours in that small room above the general store, and with each conversation, Yates felt something growing between them, a connection that went deeper than gratitude or circumstance. He found himself watching for her smile, treasuring the moments when she laughed at something he said, feeling his heart lift whenever she reached out to touch his hand. It was unexpected and terrifying and wonderful all at once, and he did not know what to do with the feelings that were taking root in his chest. Molly felt it too, though she tried to tell herself it was only natural to develop feelings for the man who had saved her life. But it was more than that. It was the way he looked at her, as if she were precious and strong at the same time. It was the gentleness in his hands when he helped her walk around the room, the patience in his voice when she grew frustrated with her slow progress, the quiet strength that radiated from him like heat from a fire. She had never met anyone like Yates Kincaid, and the more time she spent with him, the more she realized she did not want to let him go. 10 days after her rescue, Molly was finally able to walk on her own without assistance, though the wound still pulled uncomfortably with certain movements. Dr. Porter declared her out of immediate danger, though he cautioned her to take things slowly. That evening, as Yates helped her down the stairs for her first real walk through town, she stopped halfway down and turned to face him. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Yates met her eyes, seeing his own uncertainty reflected there. "What do you want to happen?" "I do not know," she admitted. "I cannot go back to Arkansas. Brennan will have claimed the land by now, and even if he has not, I have nothing left there. No family. No home. I have been trying not to think about it, but I need to figure out where I am going to go, what I am going to do." Something fierce and possessive surged through Yates, and before he could think better of it, he spoke. "Stay with me." Molly blinked in surprise. "What?" "Stay with me," he repeated, more certain now. "I have some money saved, enough to buy a small piece of land, start a ranch. I was planning to do it alone, but I do not want to be alone anymore." He reached out and took her hands in his calloused fingers wrapping around hers. "These past days with you, Molly, they have been the best days of my life. I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a short time. But I also know that I do not want to let you walk away. Stay with me. Let me build something with you." Her eyes filled with tears, but they were not tears of sadness. "Yates, I cannot ask you to take on my burdens. Brennan might still be looking for me. Being with me could put you in danger." "Let him come," Yates said, his voice hard. "I am not afraid of Silas Brennan or anyone else." "And you are not a burden, Molly. You are a gift I did not know I was looking for." She stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign of doubt or pity, but all she saw was sincerity and something deeper, something that made her heart race. "I feel it too," she whispered. "This thing between us. I was afraid to say anything because I thought maybe I was just confused, grateful for being saved. But it is more than that, is it not?" "It is everything," Yates said. And then he was kissing her, his lips gentle and sure against hers, his hands coming up to cup her face as if she were made of something infinitely precious. Molly melted into him, her arms winding around his neck, and for the first time since that terrible night in Arkansas, she felt safe. Not just protected, but truly safe, in the way that only comes from being completely known and completely accepted. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "Is that a yes?" Molly laughed, the sound bright and full of hope. "Yes. Yes, I will stay with you. I will build something with you." They were married a week later by the Justice of the Peace in Silverton, with Dr. Porter and his wife serving as witnesses. It was a simple ceremony, nothing like the wedding Molly had once imagined for herself, but standing there beside Yates, speaking vows that felt more real and true than anything she had ever said, she realized she would not have changed a single thing. This was right. He was right. They were right. Yates had been making plans while Molly recovered, and he had decided that they should head south to Oklahoma Territory. Land was opening up there, good land with water and grass, and it was far enough from Arkansas that Brennan would not think to look for them. There was a town called Ardmore that was growing fast, situated along the railroad and full of opportunities for people willing to work hard. The journey south took 3 weeks, and Molly was grateful for every extra day that Yates insisted on resting, making sure she did not push herself too hard. They traveled slowly, camping under the stars, and Molly discovered that she loved life on the trail. She loved waking up to the smell of coffee brewing over an open fire, loved riding beside Yates with the whole wide world spread out before them, loved falling asleep in his arms while coyotes sang in the distance. It was hard and sometimes uncomfortable, but it was also free in a way she had never experienced before. They reached Ardmore in early December of 1883, and Molly felt her heart lift at the sight of the bustling town. It was not large, but it was alive with energy, full of people who were building new lives in new territory. Yates found them a room at a boarding house while he scouted for land, and within 2 days, he had located a promising parcel about 5 miles outside of town. It was 200 acres with a creek running through it, good grass for cattle, and a small but sturdy cabin that needed work but was livable. "What do you think?" Yates asked as they stood looking out over their potential future. Molly turned in a slow circle, taking in the rolling hills, the clear water, the distant line of trees. She could picture it all so clearly, the ranch they would build, the life they would create. "I think it is perfect." They bought the land with most of Yates's savings, and then threw themselves into the work of making it truly theirs. They repaired the cabin, patching the roof and filling in the gaps in the walls. They built a small barn and fenced in a corral. Yates bought a small herd of cattle, just 20 head to start, and Molly proved herself surprisingly adept at working with the animals. She had grown up on a ranch after all, and though her father had tried to spare her the harder work, she had learned plenty by watching. Winter came hard and fast, but they were ready for it, with plenty of firewood stacked beside the cabin and enough supplies to see them through. Those long winter evenings, trapped inside by snow and wind, became some of Molly's most treasured memories. Yates would read aloud from the books she had managed to buy in town, his deep voice bringing stories to life in the firelight. They would talk for hours about their plans for the ranch, about the family they hoped to have someday, about dreams and fears and everything in between. And at night, wrapped in each other's arms beneath layers of quilts, Molly would marvel at how completely her life had changed, how the worst moment of her existence had somehow led her to the best. Spring arrived with a burst of wildflowers and new grass, and with it came the hard work of expanding the ranch. Yates hired 2 ranch hands, brothers from Texas named Jack and Samuel Whitmore, who proved to be solid workers and good company. The herd grew as Yates bought more cattle, and Molly started a garden beside the cabin, growing vegetables and herbs. They were building something real and lasting, and every day brought new challenges and new victories. In June, Molly realized she was pregnant. She told Yates one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, and the look of pure joy that spread across his face made her fall in love with him all over again. He pulled her into his arms and held her as if she were made of glass, his hand splayed protectively over her still flat stomach. "A baby," he breathed, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Molly asked, though she could see the answer written all over his face. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Yates said. And then he was kissing her, pouring all his love and excitement into that kiss until they were both breathless. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Molly hated having to slow down and let others take over some of her work. Yates was unbearably protective, constantly worrying that she was doing too much, but she loved him for it even when his hovering drove her to exasperation. The ranch hands treated her like precious cargo, and even the gruff Jack would drop everything to help her if she so much as reached for something on a high shelf. Their son was born in February of 1885, during a rare, warm spell that had melted the last of the winter snow. The birth was long and difficult, attended by a midwife from Ardmore named Martha Gray, and there were moments when Yates genuinely thought he might lose both of them. But Molly was as strong as she was stubborn, and when their son finally entered the world with a lusty cry, Yates felt his knees go weak with relief and love so intense it was almost painful. They named him Thomas, after Molly's brother, and he was perfect. Dark hair like his mother, blue eyes like his father, and a determined personality that promised he would be a force to be reckoned with. Yates took to fatherhood with surprising ease, often found pacing the cabin in the middle of the night with Thomas cradled against his chest, singing old cowboy songs in a low rumble that always seemed to soothe the baby back to sleep. Life on the ranch settled into a rhythm, busy and full and deeply satisfying. The herd continued to grow, and with it, their reputation. Yates Kincaid was known as a fair man who treated his animals and his workers well, and Molly was respected for her sharp mind and her willingness to work alongside anyone. They became fixtures in Ardmore, attending church on Sundays, participating in town gatherings, building friendships that would last a lifetime. 2 years after Thomas was born, they had a daughter. Molly had hoped for a girl, though she would never have admitted it aloud, and when the midwife placed the tiny, red-faced baby in her arms and announced it was indeed a daughter, Molly burst into tears of joy. They named her Sarah, after Yates's mother, and if anything, she was even more determined than her brother. She had Molly's green eyes and a smile that could light up a room, and Yates was utterly wrapped around her tiny fingers from the first moment he held her. The years passed in a blur of hard work and simple joys. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved working with the cattle almost as much as his father did. Sarah was wild and fearless, always getting into mischief, always pushing boundaries, and Molly often joked that she was being paid back for her own headstrong youth. The ranch prospered, expanding to 500 acres and supporting a herd of over 100 cattle. They built a larger house, one with real wood floors and glass windows and enough rooms for their growing family. In 1890, they had another son, whom they named Matthew. He was the easiest of their children, a happy baby who grew into a sweet-natured boy with a gift for gentling even the most skittish horses. And 2 years after that came their youngest, another daughter they named Grace, who had her father's quiet strength and her mother's fierce independence. Life was not without its challenges. There were droughts that tested them, cattle that sickened, neighbors who sometimes caused trouble. And always in the back of Molly's mind was the fear that Silas Brennan might somehow find her, might come to take revenge or finish what he had started. But years passed, and Brennan never came. Eventually, Molly learned to let go of that fear, to trust that she truly was safe, that the life she had built with Yates was real and permanent. On a warm evening in the summer of 1895, Molly and Yates sat on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard. Thomas was 15 now, tall and capable, already talking about expanding the herd even further. Sarah was 13, still wild but also showing signs of the remarkable woman she would become. Matthew was 5, currently trying to teach Grace how to do a handstand with limited success. The sounds of their laughter floated on the summer breeze, and Molly felt a contentment so deep and complete that it brought tears to her eyes. "What are you thinking about?" Yates asked, reaching over to take her hand in his. "That night on the mountain," Molly said softly. "When I thought I was going to die. I remember being so angry, so bitter that my life would end that way, alone and afraid in the cold. And now look at this." She gestured to their children, their land, the home they had built together. "I have a life I never could have imagined, a family, a purpose." "Everything." Yates lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "I think about that night too, how I almost did not go up that trail, how I almost decided to head back to camp instead. What would have happened if I had made a different choice?" "But you did not," Molly said, turning to look at him. After 12 years of marriage, 4 children, and countless struggles overcome together, she loved him even more than she had on their wedding day. "You found me. You saved me, and then you gave me a reason to keep living." "You saved me too," Yates said quietly. "I did not even know how lost I was until I found you. You gave me everything, Molly. A home, a family, a reason to build something that would last." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, hands clasped, watching the sun sink lower toward the horizon. The land stretched out before them, their land, marked with the sweat and love of years of hard work. In the distance, the cattle grazed peacefully, and somewhere in the barn, one of the hands was singing a song that drifted faintly on the evening air. "You ever regret it?" Molly asked suddenly. "Taking me in. Your life would have been simpler without me and all the complications I brought." Yates turned to face her fully, his blue eyes intense and serious. "Not for one single second. Not ever. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Molly Kincaid. You and those 4 miracles playing in our yard. I would make that same choice 1,000 times over." Molly leaned in and kissed him, a kiss that held 12 years of love and partnership and unwavering devotion. When they pulled apart, she rested her head on his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, holding her close as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and pink. Thomas came running up to the porch, his face flushed with excitement. "Papa, one of the mares is showing signs she might foal tonight. You want to come check on her?" Yates glanced at Molly, who smiled and nodded. "Go on. I will get the younger ones ready for bed." He kissed her forehead and stood, following Thomas toward the barn with easy strides. Molly watched them go, her heart full to bursting. Sarah appeared at her elbow, having successfully herded the 2 youngest up onto the porch. "Mama, will you tell us a story before bed?" Grace asked, her small hand slipping into Molly's. "Of course, sweetheart." "What kind of story do you want to hear?" "Tell us about how you and Papa met," Sarah said, settling onto the porch swing. It was her favorite story, one she never tired of hearing. Molly gathered her children around her, Matthew climbing into her lap while Grace snuggled against her side. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, she told them the story once more, about a mountain pass and a desperate journey, about a cowboy who had chosen to help a stranger, about how love could bloom even in the darkest moments. She did not tell them all the details, the blood and the terror and the grief she had carried. Those parts would come later when they were older and could understand. For now, she told them the important parts, the true parts. That sometimes life could break you, could take everything you loved and leave you bleeding and alone. But if you kept going, if you refused to give up, you might just find something worth living for on the other side of that pain. As she spoke, Yates returned from the barn, the mare fine and the crisis averted. He stood in the doorway listening to his wife tell their story to their children, and felt a gratitude so profound it made his throat tight. He had spent so many years drifting, never finding a place to belong, never imagining he could have something like this. And then he had found a bleeding woman on a mountain pass, and his whole world had changed. He thought about the miles he had carried her, every step driven by desperation and determination. He thought about the hours he had spent at her bedside, willing her to survive. He thought about the moment she had opened her eyes and looked at him, really looked at him, and he had known with absolute certainty that his life would never be the same. He would do it all again in a heartbeat, would carry her 1,000 miles if that was what it took, would fight any battle, overcome any obstacle, endure any hardship. Because she was his heart, his home, his reason for everything. Later that night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Molly and Yates lay in their bed, wrapped in each other's arms. Through the open window came the sounds of the night, crickets and distant cattle, the rustle of wind through grass. It was the sound of home, of peace, of a life well lived. "I love you," Molly whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Yates replied, his arms tightening around her. "Always." And there, in the house they had built together on land they had claimed as their own, surrounded by the family they had created and the life they had fought for, they drifted off to sleep. The journey from that bloody mountain, past to this moment of perfect contentment, had been long and difficult, but every step had been worth it. They had found each other in the wilderness, and in finding each other, they had found everything they needed. The ranch continued to thrive through the years. Thomas eventually took over more of the daily operations, proving himself a capable rancher with a good head for business. Sarah married a young banker from Ardmore and gave Molly and Yates their first grandchildren, twin boys who were just as mischievous as their mother had been. Matthew became known throughout the territory as one of the finest horse trainers around, his gentle touch and infinite patience producing animals that were sought after from Texas to Montana. And Grace, their youngest, surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, fulfilling the dream her mother had once harbored for herself. Molly and Yates grew old together, their hair turning silver, their faces mapping the years with lines earned from laughter and hard work. They remained devoted to each other until the very end, still holding hands on the porch each evening, still stealing kisses when they thought no one was looking, still very much in love after decades of marriage. When Yates passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73, Molly grieved deeply but without regret. They had lived a full life together, had built something lasting and beautiful, had loved each other well. She lived another 5 years without him, surrounded by children and grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren. And she spent those years sharing stories about the remarkable man who had saved her life, and then made that life worth living. On her own final night, lying in the bed she had shared with Yates for so many years, Molly Kincaid closed her eyes and thought about that mountain pass one last time. She thought about the blood and the cold and the certainty that she was going to die alone. And then she thought about the moment she had heard hoofbeats, had felt strong arms lift her, had heard a deep voice promise that everything would be all right. He had kept that promise. For 50 years, he had kept that promise. And now, as she drifted away, Molly could have sworn she felt those strong arms around her once more, could hear that beloved voice calling her home. She went to him gladly, with a smile on her face and a heart full of gratitude for the beautiful, unexpected gift that had been her life. The ranch stayed in the family for generations, passed down from parent to child, each new generation adding their own chapter to the story. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right through the mountain passes to the north, the children would gather on that same porch where Molly had once told stories to her own children, and they would hear the tale again. About the woman who bled and the cowboy who saved her, about a desperate journey through the darkness, about love that had conquered fear and built something that would endure long after they were gone. It became legend in the family, a reminder of where they had come from, of the strength and love that had founded their legacy. And at the heart of that legend was a simple truth that echoed through the generations. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us exactly where we need to be, into the arms of the people who will love us best. Molly and Yates had proven that truth, had lived it fully, and their descendants carried that lesson forward, a precious inheritance more valuable than any land or cattle or material wealth. They had shown what was possible when two people chose each other, chose love, chose to build something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy. And that was the greatest legacy of all.